traveled to war-torn Ukraine with General Romeo Dallaire, former UN peacekeeping commander during the Rwandan genocide, and his wife, Marie-Claude Michaud. Both are renowned experts on the psychological impact of war. Their goal was to witness firsthand how the war affects civilians and military, and to explore how their expertise might aid veterans and their families in healing from trauma. It was a return to the shadow of evil that the general had once witnessed in Rwanda, and into the darkest corners of human nature. This is the first time for you in the former Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe, inside. What were you expecting here to see? Can you explain?
I am now here visiting and doing things, but in a war, but still. But the reality of it did come up when we actually hit the ground and started to see what had been going on between the Russians and the Ukrainians.
I was looking to go to Izium because I watched the news on Ukraine since the beginning of the war. It was surrealistic.
We took them to the town of Izium that had been under Russian occupation. And during that occupation, the Russians organized a real terror against the population. And we visited a mass grave where more than 400 civilians were buried that had been tortured in cellars and did not survive the torture.
Is this the place where the UN investigators came?
The human rights investigation.
Yes,
That's
yes,
the place.
yes.
Yeah, good.
Це були масові захоронення. Десь 1000 людей, які були з різних причин. Хто закатований, хто не закатований. І коли були вже ці ексгумація проходила, то тут були і військові, і з зав'язаними руками, і скручені, і жінки, і
So it shows the total disdain of any sense of humanity. Humanity disappears.
Я з вами згодна 100%, тому що оці півроку це реально було пекло, тому що були люди закатовані тільки за те, що не так глянули, не так відповіли. Вони не мали права виходити з своїх домівок.
I'm not sure if they think them superhumans or simply that they are humans and their victims are not humans. And as they told me and I saw in Africa, then killing is just like killing a fly. No different for them. So that's 17.
17 people in the city of Izium in the morgue.
We're buried right here. Yeah.
Being there, feeling that place with Marina, it gave me the depth of not only the combat of the military, but also the combat of all these people.
Коли я повернулася з деокупації, я хочу сказати, я не впізнала тих людей, кого я знала. Це були такі якісь чорні, змучені, з таким, знаєте, от з-під лоба дивлячись, нікому не довіряють, тобто залякані люди.
It will take a bit of time to be able to live with places like this amongst you. That's going to be how do you say, a scar for a long time.
And where's your mom?
Тут, в Ізюмі.
She's here in
Так,
Izium.
yes. Жовтня буде 82 роки.
You are a very, very brave lady. Very brave. Yeah. this has got to become a very much a sacred place for you people here, because without showing that reverence, those deaths will not be meaning enough to remember that how evil things can happen.
So this is one of the worst situations because people were here still alive. They were shouting and nobody could come near to pull them out.
The whole center of the building was taken out.
Oh, God. Bоже мой.
And they were all in the basement. Or were they on the top floors?
Загинули, всі були в підвалах.
The corpses were taken out only after the occupation. So they were all the time lying here.
Stayed there though.
Probably just didn't want the people to know what happened over here.
I remember saying to Romeo that reminded me of ex-Yugoslavia, when I've seen, all this building destroyed.
So they, in Izum, they had 12 schools before the invasion. Only one is left.
They hit all the schools.
Yeah.
Why would they hit all the schools?
Because they're destroying civilian infrastructure in order to demoralize people.
The historic building was destroyed. Yeah, we will not forget.
There is a PBS documentary on the genocide in Rwanda. And at the end, Madeleine Albright said, well, if we would have known, then of course we would have intervened. Just like after the Second World War, the Allies said, well, if we had known what happened in Auschwitz, we would have intervened. And actually, they knew exactly what was happening in Auschwitz. Do we ever learn from history?
I think one of the important things is that you better think twice about learning from history, because what seems to be learned are the wrong lessons. Because all we're doing is learning wrong lessons, that we have not brought in innovative solutions to prevent these things from happening in the first place. At the same time Rwanda was going on, we put 67,000 troops into ex-Yugoslavia, which is white, European, allies or potential enemies to our security. So yeah, we paid the price there. And we even had Africans serving in Yugoslavia. I couldn't even keep my force. I was reduced to only 450 because nobody cared about the sub-Sahara black African. Which then brought me to the conclusion that not all humans are human. Some actually think and believe that they are more human than another. I don't see anybody coming here and you can give you all the ammunition you want, but if you don't end up with having enough troops to be able to be trained and to use it and to maintain it, what the hell is the use? They become liabilities. So it's a matter of self-interest and of assessing whether or not these people are important as you are, your own people. And politicians being risk adverse, they don't want casualties. And so they're very short term. And they're looking for a way out instead of looking for a way to prevent. And so when some horrible man like Putin says, I'll use tactical nukes, well, that was the excuse they needed to not come in.
We took them to the town of Barava, which is very close to the front line, where the military commander showed us around and showed the consequences of the constant bombing by the Russians. The day after we visited the town, the inhabitants were evacuated.
Ну, давайте зайдемо. Так куди ми? В будинок культури зайдемо? Давайте, добре.
Okay. Ну да.
Палац культури на 500 посадочних місць. Чудовий палац, був шикарним.
And but what hit it?
Спочатку 5 грудня в минулому році, 23-му, прилетіли шахеди, атака шахедами, і мені в кабінет один прилетів. У лютому було вдарено ракетою в те крило. Ми тут знаходилися, селищна рада, військова адміністрація тут знаходилася. А десь через місяць удар був сюди.
So were there people in the?
Были люди тут, когда была атака? Погибли?
Ні, це було вночі і ввечері. Барава є 17 кілометрів до фронту зараз.
At this distance, it's one of those air bombs. Yeah, it's not artillery. So, in military terms, this is what you call harassing fire.
Терор.
Да, терор.
Ну а взагалі знищені в громаді всі школи, навчальні всі
So
заклади,
all the government
заклади
buildings.
культури.
The sewer systems and so on, are they still functioning?
Так, у селищі працює і вода, і каналізація, світло, газ, все є. Спасатели, энергетики попадали не один раз под обстрел. Ну, выезжали, тушили пожары, а те восстанавливали линии электропередач очень много раз.
So, what is morale like?
Люди крепкие, они верят в победу в основном. Но, конечно, ну, они не хотят под бомбежками, они выезжают на правый берег речки. Я тут зараз живу с семьей, я как лично до последнего.
You're also fighting the war.
Чим важко зараз. Але кожен на своєму місці повинен все робити для перемоги.
The war, there are some people that are dealing with the war, the NGOs, they collect money, they try to help Ukrainians, but by and large, it doesn't really concern them. That is something really worrying. It's partially because, of course, the last war that was in Western Europe is 80 years ago. How do you counter this?
Not quite 2 months into the war in Rwanda, we already had well over 500,000 bodies floating in the rivers and in mass graves and on the streets, and dogs eating them and rats. They're just slaughtering. It's just hell. But across the border, there's a normalcy. People, keep on going. And so I come back from 1 year in operational theater there, and the chief of staff is walking with me in a car, and he says, "Welcome back, sir, from Rwanda." He says, "Welcome back to the real world." I said, "What do you mean, the real world?" But the real world to them is what's going on there, until the real world hits their border. Then all of a sudden, that changes.
We visited also one of the brigades of the National Guard, where a group of soldiers were for a few days recovering from the horrors of the battle at the front.
This is one, confirm.
Good.
Fine.
How are you?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Nice to
Nice
meet you.
mustache. Very nice. My wife, who ran the veterans program in Canada for families, and I built and led the charge of changing our whole veteran program. And it took us 20 years to do it.
And I have to say something that I just see in some of you already the pain. That's normal. It means that you are human.
It reminded me of Romeo several years ago. Romeo, you know, he has blue eyes and they are clear. But years ago, they were so troubled that I could see his soul, broken soul, through his eyes.
You met with near the front line with soldiers that just came back from the front line for a couple of days. What did you see in their behavior, in their eyes?
Well, they were still in the forward area. I seen it in my Dutch nephew who was in Yugoslavia. I saw it in him 3 years after. What do you want me to say to the commander? Just be polite, that's all.
Тільки чемними. Ми самі найкращі і хочемо відпустку.
They want a holiday.
Very good point. Very good. And, does he shave? He shave yet? He's very young. Yeah. But psychologically, that war never ends. All it is you can control it. My father spent 6 years here in Europe fighting. He became psychologically very affected. But there was absolutely no help for him. There was no help for the families, nothing. So I lived a family where my father drank and my mother beat me for years and years. But at the same time, he'd cry because he couldn't prevent it, couldn't stop it. So there is absolutely no way that coming out of these vicious wars that they're coming out of in this era, that families can survive if there's not a true, deep love that is stronger than anything else. It is 10 o'clock at night, and the weather was bad, and a lot of memories start coming back. And you feel that it's getting very difficult. Can you call somebody who will come and sit with you for 2 hours and listen to you talk so that you can get through the crisis and let the evil that is in your mind that is hurting you out by talking? Them listening, but you talking.
Мені допомагає музика.
That's part of the peer support also.
Я тримаюсь такої, знаєте, Гаррі Поттер, я думаю, всі фільм бачили, да? Як там правильно, може, хтось поправив, навіть в темноті можна побачити світло, якщо не забувати його вмикати.
Let's turn it on.
He has a fundamental optimism because he knows that being a cook, he can make people so very happy.
Exactly.
Yes, a strong veteran, yeah. And thank you for letting us come into your home.
Барбекю?
I'm not sure about the barbecue. Thank you very much. I'm signing these to your injured warriors. Voila.
Your main traumatic experiences were 30 years ago. The trauma, you still have the effects of this?
I was still, 30 years later, 24 years of therapy, 9 pills a day, and the love of an extraordinary woman. And every now and again, the worst things come up. The ethical and moral dilemmas of deciding who's living and who's killing. You know, whatever decision you take, people will suffer, people will die, but you can't accept either this incredibly stupid comment that people would say to me, oh, well, you know, you did the best you could. That's bullshit. When you're in command and when you're in these missions and when you're in those scenarios, there's no such thing as the best you could, because what is required is more than that. And because you can't find more, because there's nothing more that you seem to be able to pull, that delta there is where the guilt comes in, and that's what will eat your soul if you're not protected.
Outside Sloviansk, we took them to see the work of a voluntary group, which is exhuming bodies that they find on the battlefield. They identify them and then bring them to the morgue. The Russians that they find are used in order to convince the Russians to hand over Ukrainian military that have been died and are in Russian hands.
Ми виносимо з позицій, якщо там є тіла, або обшукуємо територію, на яких були бойові дії. І цивільних мешканців теж, всіх людей збираємо, в незалежності від. Після цього ми передаємо тіла в морг. І якщо це військові Російської Федерації, тобто вже домовляється з тієї території для того, щоб обміняти на тіла українських військових.
And you're being successful.
Так, звичайно, всі ці обміни, які проводяться, це фактично завдяки нашій групі.
I think that's extraordinary. And the government is what in this all this?
Уряд домовляється з тієї території. Справа в тому, що вони не дуже йдуть на те, щоб міняти тілами. Не дуже. Кількість їхніх загиблих, вона скорочена, тобто з їхньої сторони. І коли ми знаходимо тіла воїнів, які там в них навіть не вважається, що вони десь зникли, да? Тобто він по факту ще живий, по документах, а ми вже його привозимо мертвим. Тобто довіра до влади, вона втрачається з-за того, що ми показуємо правду. Ми декілька разів заїжджали на окуповані території, тобто нас оточували росіяни, ми виходили звідти.
And when did you start doing this?
З 13 років, я вже 25 років займаюся цим. Спочатку я по Другій і Першій світовій війні в пошуковому загоні, а з початку 14-го ми перша група в Україні, яка займалась пошуком загиблих.
This one was very young.
Why did they bring the bodies here?
А ми тут оглядаємо. Тут не багато людей, не так людно, ми можемо спокійно оглянути, описати і потім відправити їх до моргу. Тобто, якщо б нас росіяни пускали на окуповану територію, то ми б забирали б і їхніх, і своїх з окупованої території, але, на жаль, такої домовленості немає. Просто не дають забрати, обстрілюють, бачать, дронами б'ють. Тобто бачать, що йдуть з мішками тіла забирати, і ні своїх, ні наших не дають. Тому що кожне життя, воно безцінне, незалежно якої ти національності, це безглуздя. Навіщо стільки людей було покласти?
Russian stuff that was hit. There used to be much more standing. You're pretty critical of the way the West has been responding to this crisis, right?
I have been very vocal, and now, having been on the ground, I am even more outraged at how the rest of the European countries and NATO, dominated by the Americans, of course, and even Canada, which has such a massive Ukrainian diaspora, has been reluctant, truly commit with boots on the ground to, if not be in the front lines, to be on the ground inside the country and part of the battle. It's one thing to send ammunition and so on. It's another thing to be sort of prepared to see and take casualties and spill blood. It's a command post. It didn't have many troops. It had more command maps and communications. So the soldiers, but the way in is there. So I had, in Rwanda, I had these. Yeah, 8.
Yeah, we're gonna pick up our stuff.
A huge impression made the wall of Sorel next to the Mikhailivsky monastery, where the photos are put of soldiers that have died since the start of the war in 2014. The wall is long, but not long enough to have all the photos of the soldiers that have been killed ever since.
Yeah, 14, yeah.
Just 87. Yeah, again.
That's, see, he would be 25.
When he died.
That wall over at the square, you know, is significant. I've been to a wall where I've had 30,000 troops. I've been to the American wall that had 58,000 troops. But it wasn't even defending their country, it was defending human rights or humanity. And so your country is trying to defend the fundamental freedom and human rights of your own nation. And yet that price needs leadership. That price needs to be sustained by leadership. And that leadership is not just making sure you got ammunition. It means that the people are committed wholly to the mission of winning the war. Yeah, well.
So you've been now in the country for almost 10 days. What is the most deep impression that you had?
The hardest impression, or the strongest impression, is that the Russians will never win Ukraine. That possibility is gone. So the question is how well will Ukraine be able to sustain, to continue to make it impossible for the Russians to win? What will be the price the Ukrainians have to pay for that?
Mm-hmm. You're an optimist.
An optimist?
Yeah.
Yes, I truly believe that there's a greater calling to humanity. I believe that there is no limit to what human beings can do when they're well led, and they've got good leadership, and they got a focus and an ambition, and they can see what's going to happen. If we cannot bring true, lasting peace, not these truces. Imagine if all those dying, the people who've suffered and so on, you end up in Ukraine with a truce. They'll say, no, it's a peace agreement. Horseshit. There's no such thing as a peace agreement. There's peace. There's lasting peace.
The war in Ukraine has immense proportions, not only with regards to the fact that the whole security system in Europe has collapsed and that everything that was clear and safe after the Second World War is gone, but it also has an enormous psychological consequence for generations to come. But it also affects all the countries around, because if the war in Ukraine is lost, it will mean that the war will also take place somewhere else. The war needs to be won, because this is the only way that Europe can guarantee safety and freedom and human rights on the European continent. And so support of Ukraine is important, not only just for Europe, but for the whole global community.